Roddy, first of all, thank you for joining us today. I wanted to talk a little bit about why myself and Cameo Recruitment have got involved with this and partnered with CyberSafe. The reason being, obviously, I own Cameo Recruitment. We are a small business based in Cambridge. I've always been on board with cybersecurity, but the cost of it to me was the biggest thing. I have the usual technology on the computer, all of those kind of things, but actually looking into it beyond that always seemed to be at a really costly price for a small business that's only 2 years old. So when I found out about CyberSafe, I was really interested to find out actually how it works, and what I found from using this. I've actually done the training myself along with my colleagues. It's a really, really friendly training program, but it opens up the avenues of learning about the human elements, which I found really, really useful. So just as an example, since I've done the training, I have had the emails come through which are trying to get you to sign up to things. I had one last week that was from TV licensing, of all things, and actually it really opened up my eyes. It looked so genuine. Everything on there, even the email address, everything looked genuine. And I had to actually check my bank to see if I'd already had money taken, because otherwise I could have quite easily clicked on it. So it's not just about the workplace, which is what I really like about CyberSafe. It actually expands into your personal life as well. So for me, I've told my friends, my family, I'm educating them on a daily basis. But from a business point of view, it's actually really clever in the way that it gets your employees to think and stop before they make that move that could actually really cause a threat to your business. So for me, all I can really say is I'm really excited to be a partner with CyberSafe, because we like to offer an extension to our clients that we work with to give them advice so we can. It's definitely helped me. So obviously today, it's really great that you'll be able to now listen to Dom and find out a bit more, which will hopefully help you as well. So thank you for listening to me. I'm now going to hand you over to the man with all the knowledge, and we'll be listening too. So thank you.
Morning, thanks Sharon. Morning everyone, and welcome to the session. Thanks for taking the time to join us, we really appreciate it. So I'm Dom Wordsworth, and I'm really going to be talking today around what we see as a kind of a growing trend and a growing threat to small to mid-sized businesses of the impact of a cyber attack. I'm going to, I guess, spend about 30 to 40 minutes looking at some of the background, just to kind of give you a view of the landscape really, and some of the kind of the key trends that we're seeing in the way that organisations like yours are being targeted. I want to try and put that in the context of a small business. I think a lot of what we see in the news, when we read in the newspapers, are around attacks on very large international organisations, and we probably have a tendency to think that, you know, this kind of stuff is happening to somebody else, to a larger organisation than mine. But we certainly see that there's some trends there and some things that a smaller business needs to think about. I'll try and cover some of the more common attack methods that we see. They're probably things that you're aware of, and I'll put that in the context, again, of some of the trends that we're seeing around the current situation. So at no point I think have we ever seen such a volume of targeted attacks, really leveraging the kind of the pandemic and our response, people's emotional response to what's happening, to try and defraud them as individuals and their businesses as well. So I'll cover some of that. I want to kind of talk about some of the cost as well, because there's a lot of hidden costs and kind of ramifications of a cyber attack, and just to kind of really make you aware of some of those things, so that I can hopefully elevate this as in terms of the consideration that you need to put to it. But without kind of being the arbiter of doom, I also want to cover the response. What do we do about this, and how can we understand our current capability, the things that we are able to do today in defending ourselves, and what we can do to prepare ourselves for the future. And importantly, and as Sharon alluded to, I want to talk about really, for me, the biggest or most important factor, which is the way that we drive awareness and education into our staff and our employees around their obligations to the organisation in defending themselves. So without further ado, there's a couple of stats I wanted to kind of start with really, and this is really my kind of shock and awe part of the process, I guess, which is, this is the UK government's National Cybersecurity Centre released some stats recently based on global research, which is that something like 50% of small to mid-sized businesses in the UK will come under attack come under a cyber attack in the next year. And that obviously will vary in the kind of the degree of severity and potentially the severity of the outcome. But it's a pretty scary stat when you consider this next one, which is that globally, over half of those organizations who suffer a major cyber attack, and by that I mean, suffer a significant financial loss or significant disruption to their business processes as a result of that attack, will close their doors within 12 months. So whilst we often have the view that large organizations get hit, and they often have the resilience, the technology, and the deeper pockets to kind of withstand this kind of activity, for a small business, this kind of incident can be devastating. So just kind of put this in the context, and obviously in the context, we've been through a major disruption to the way that we work and do business in recent times. But if you think about the implications of an outage, maybe for 2, 3, 4 weeks on your business today, where you can't access information on your customers, on your products, your business is on its knees, really. Just have a think about what that might, what the implications of that might be for yourself. And why is this happening? So I've worked in the cyber industry now for about 20 years. Our consultancy practice is based in Cambridge, and we have seen, over that time, a seismic shift in the scale and the capacity of organized criminal gangs and now nation states to deliver what really has been an industrialized process now for hacking and defrauding organizations. So gone are the days where the view is that, a hacker, if we take the old, the Hollywood movie, is some, kid in a basement surrounded by pizza boxes that's hacking, trying to attack NASA for fun. Today, that looks more like, something like this. These are people who go to work in an office block. They work a shift and they have a target, which is, to defraud the maximum value that they can from their victims. And if you think about the effort that it takes to attack a large organization who spend lots of money protecting themselves, actually these days that's relatively complicated. It's a pretty complex thing to try and do. So actually moving your sites onto a smaller organization who are less capable of defending themselves and don't have those investments in technology, perhaps makes you that kind of softer target or that easier target. And rather than go and try and defraud a very large organization for £1 million, I can go and try and defraud 10 smaller ones for 100K. And in doing so, I hit my target and I get my annual, my quarterly bonus. So this is a process that we see across the world now, very organized and delivered at scale, targeting companies all over the world of all sizes. The other thing that we see, if we look at all of the major kind of public hacks in the world, in recent years, the Sonys and eBay and AT&T, all the, a big number of these events that kind of hit the headlines, they start with a small company being attacked. Right? So again, if I can compromise a smaller organization, and then use that as a platform to leverage myself into the larger organization. This is called a supply chain attack, and it allows me effectively backdoor and easier access into that larger organization. So although you might, as the smaller organization, not be the target necessarily, the ultimate target, you become the unwitting victim in this process, and also potentially liable to your customer as a result, because they have been breached as a result of a lack of security at some point in your organization. So again, where we're seeing smaller companies that are being targeted, it's oftentimes that they are just, as I say, the unwitting victim of a larger process that's being played out. And if we look at the kind of the major the trends that we see, certainly in the cyber industry, and I've noticed this more so over probably the last 2 years, there is definitely a realization that for all the investments you make in technology to protect your people and your data and your information and your finances, actually the vast bulk of breaches are caused by the action or inaction of your employees. And oftentimes, these are not malicious acts, although increasingly that we see that they are. The reality is, human error is a significant factor in our ability to kind of defend ourselves. And so this is a real kind of theme in terms of how do we move the needle in terms of providing education and awareness for our staff, so that they can get on the front, be our first line of defence rather than potentially a hole in our kind of security protection. So very much the kind of the human element is a big factor, and certainly the kind of the attacks that we see, the methods, the techniques, and the tactics of the threat actors are really targeting what they see as weak spots in human behaviour. It's the reaction to events. It's exploiting human emotion to try and get them to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do under normal circumstances. So, just wanted to kind of talk about some of the reasons as to why a small firm might be a target, because one of the key things that we see when we interview companies and we talk to customers is oftentimes, the question that they'll ask themselves is, am I really a target? Okay, I'm a small firm, I'm 30 people or I'm 10 people. Why does a hacker care about me? Okay, when they can be targeting a bank or they can be targeting something of greater value. Well, the reality is, small firms often are in that supply chain to high value clients and customers. If you're a law firm or you're an accountancy practice or you're in that kind of service industry, then you will oftentimes have clients where you hold and have access to information about those high value customers that you have. And oftentimes within an industry, within those small industries, the software packages that are used are very similar. The processes are often very tightly coupled to that. And so if I can exploit one vulnerability within that, I can actually find myself lots of potential victims. But typically as well, when we talk to organizations, of this kind of size, kind of sub 250 users, oftentimes, typically, they will lack some of the kind of the more traditional cyber defense tools and a policy and practice that we would see in place in a larger organization. So again, a softer option for a potential attacker. And then also the lack of planning and capability around how to respond to an event means that under pressure, a small business is a lot more likely to pay out in a ransom. And we see that the trend is definitely that, globally, and certainly in the UK, we are seeing that ransom payments are being made more frequently because people are caught in a situation where their business is on its knees and they have no other option. There is no plan B. So just in terms of your organization, if you think, why would I be an attacker? Well, think about the kinds of information that you hold, kind of access to customers that you potentially provide, and that might help you think, put it in context in terms of the value that you might represent to somebody who wants to defraud or attack you. So what are the kind of the common methods that we see? Phishing is certainly probably the number one kind of attack vector that we see today, which is predominantly an email attack, social engineering attack by some kind of threat actor posing as somebody legitimate, whether that's posing as PayPal, or they're posing as the post office, or they're posing as the TV licensing, as Sharon Court Outlet saw this week. This is designed to trick you as an individual into providing information, sensitive information, or doing something, clicking a link that you wouldn't ordinarily do. And even pre-COVID, the fake email messages from the taxman are amongst the most successful and replicated attacks that we see in the UK today, and that trend has only massively accelerated over COVID. So these are things that will play on human emotion. So I've click here to review your the tax rebate that you're owed, etc., or click here to see an update on the emergency funding that you've applied for, etc. These are very sophisticated attacks. These emails will look very legitimate, and oftentimes there will only be a very tiny difference in the real email that's being sent by HMRC and the fake one that goes out. So this is about being extra vigilant in this time, and we would always talk about, vigilance pre-COVID is absolutely necessary, but today this is an even greater obligation that you have in protecting your organization, to be checking and questioning anything that comes through that is having you do something that you wouldn't ordinarily think about doing. So the other one we see is malware, and malware around the globe is rife. Last year, 188 million variants of malware were released into the wild, because technology is now capable of mutating these kind of software attacks, very rapidly. So this is around software that's designed to then encrypt your information, hijack your systems for means that I can then use to blackmail you and to extort finances from you, or monitor your activity and use that as a means to then leverage a more sophisticated attack. So again, these are things that are often not targeted at you as a specific organization. They are just out in the wild, and if you're not protecting yourself and understanding the risks and locking down those areas that you might be attacked from, then again, there is a significant chance today, potentially 1 in 2 chance, that at some point you will be the unwitting victim of code that is designed to attack you in that way. So in terms of the damage, and one of the things that I'm always keen to talk to companies about is often their view is that if they were a victim of a cyber attack, their data was encrypted and there was a ransom, that they pay the ransom and they're kind of back in the saddle. And oftentimes, today, based on the things that you have to do to respond to that kind of incident, means that there are often significant and ongoing costs to your organization outside of just potentially paying a ransom to bit of use your information again. So if your customer's information has been breached, then you have there are costs involved in making that right to your customers. So informing them of the breach, providing them with credit and identity monitoring, potentially getting involved in some kind of forensic investigation to get to the bottom of what's happened. And that's before you then even start to think about the data that's potentially been damaged and needs restoring, and the loss to your business in a week or 2 or 3 that you've now been unable to work, or you're back to doing things on paper. Add to that then those the fact that you might have had money fraudulently removed from your account or transferred because of a social engineering attack, and the loss of income, etc. So in the first instance, the costs can be significant, and they can, in many cases, be catastrophic to an organisation. Add to this, then, certainly today with the regulatory and legislative landscape, you might also then be facing fines for the loss or theft of that data in your care, because you violated national or international laws as well. So there are, as I say, significant ongoing implications for a breach beyond perhaps what often people see as is perhaps just the tip of the iceberg. And add to that then the reputational damage of an attack. We see this a lot, where your business is based on a relationship of trust with your customers. A cyber attack will be viewed as a breach of that trust. And we have organizations that reputationally have been damaged, beyond repair as a result of this kind of activity. So what can we do? What can we do about this? And obviously there is a thriving cybersecurity community and industry in the UK, with experts who can help you assess your current preparedness for an attack and your current capability, i.e. what are the gaps, what are the potential areas that could be exploited, to help you prepare and think about the things that you need to do for the future, the cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving. New threats and new attacks are constantly coming out. And so cybersecurity is not a kind of one hit kind of process. It's an evolving kind of journey, as it were. And then, as I say, I've mentioned a few times now, how do we then translate that into education and awareness for your employees, so that in the daily actions that they take, they are considering their obligations to you as as an employee around securing your organisation. So the first thing that we would do is talk about assessing your current state, and without going into too much kind of detail today, would love to kind of discuss this kind of stuff further, perhaps after these sessions. But the key area or error that people make is thinking that cybersecurity is a technical problem, that we can solve it with a technical solution. And actually, cyber is plugged into your entire organization, the way that your business operates, your landscape, the business that you operate in, your own capabilities, and the way that you deliver your services and customers, services to your customer. And then also, the kind of changing regulatory and legislative landscape that goes along with that. So, everybody's now, in the UK, or currently is subject to the GDPR. There are kind of national and international laws that require organisations to provide protection for systems, personal information, etc. So the first thing to do is to assess your current posture, as it were, your current cyber maturity with your business landscape, your operational landscape, your current capabilities, and all of these things tied together in a holistic view. And then from there, you can start to understand, once you've taken that top-down view, you can start to build and assess the risks to your company's information systems with a similar level of effort and vigor that you would for your legal, regulatory, financial, and operational risk. Okay, so in the same way that you provide process and focus on those areas of your business, we need to start thinking about cybersecurity in that way. And there's a number of things that we can do that. We can set up a risk management regime. Okay, this is about making cyber a priority for the senior people within your company, whether you're the business owner or it's the execs or it's the management team. We need to start taking or understanding cyber risk as a priority, in that way. We need to then produce supporting policies, okay, that the company is going to embed and is going to adhere to and make sure are effective, and base this all around your risk appetite. Okay, there will always be a risk reward kind of component here, because you can potentially spend an awful lot of money on cybersecurity products and services. Okay, this is about putting it in the context, qualifying that to the context of your business. But these kind of processes will allow you then to look at all of these various areas where you might be vulnerable around. I mean, let's take the bottom right, home and mobile working. If we take that top down, that view of how are we managing risk to our business, we can then start to flow in and look at, okay, how does the way we work impact that? What are the things that we need to do to mitigate those risks? How do we make sure that those things are being continually updated over time to make sure that we don't leave ourselves exposed? And these kind of processes that we take you through are all based on international standards. They're standards written and obviously developed by the UK government as part of the NCSE, and they allow you to take a very structured approach to delivering cyber maturity through your organisation. And to be frank, most organisations where we start this process, there is a small amount of work clearly that has been done, but this isn't a kind of something that has to be achieved overnight. Right? This is an evolving process that over time you can develop and build into the way that you work, and build that extra confidence for you and your customers that you're protecting your organisation and their information. So let's have I just want to kind of reconsider this stat again. It's delivered by, it's from research from IBM. My own take on it is this number probably is somewhere from about 80% plus. If you look at all of the research that's done globally across companies of all shapes and sizes, the number comes out somewhere between 80 and 95%. I've used the high one for the shock and awe kind of factor here today. But the reality is, this is clearly an issue that we have in that, we can spend, make significant investment in protecting ourselves, but the malicious or unwitting action of an employee could potentially expose us to those threats, regardless. So, one of the challenges that we've seen, I think, is that attempts to try and deliver a higher level of awareness around, what a user should be thinking about and the action they should be taking, have been very piecemeal in the past. There've been kind of tick box exercises that really people don't engage with and don't really move the needle in terms of people's understanding of the risk to them, and therefore the things that they need to do to try and protect themselves. One of the things that I think is very important is that we try and separate people's view of cyber from being just something they think about and consider when they're in the workplace. Okay, for starters, if an employee thinks, generally just kind of human nature, if this is something that they are kind of put on a annual course for an hour and they have to review some content and tick some boxes, it's seen as a pain. Security is often seen when we interview employees as being something that gets in the way of their work. It holds them up. It stops them doing things. It's a pain. It's not seen as an enabler to their working environment. It's seen as a kind of a hoop to jump through. And so our view is that we can actually change that quite considerably by having them think about, the way that they secure themselves in their own personal environment. So in their, at home with their family, how are they protecting themselves? Because by getting people to think along those lines and in that context, actually we can start to develop good behavior that then migrates into the workplace. If somebody is thinking about, how am I protecting my children's email accounts? How am I protecting, my family from the threat from being online? Then those kind of things actually will resonate in terms of their obligations and the things that they need to do, which are the same effectively in the workplace as well. And so it's about changing perception, moving away from this notion of tick box training, because it doesn't have an impact, and doing something which allows us to not only in an impactful way change the way that people behave, get them to question, take a step back, do something different than just click the link blindly. So how do we change their behavior? Importantly, how do we measure that behavior so that we can see where our weaknesses are and see improvements over time? Because unless we understand our risk, then we're only ever going to be as strong as that weakest link. And for all the investments and effort we make, one person can cause us that problem. So I wanted to talk about a couple of the things that, and I'm going to come on to what we see as one of the solutions in the market today for this, which is a product called CyberSafe, an online platform for delivering cyber awareness and training, which is very tailored towards delivering this engaging content and having people think and act in a very different way. A couple of the things that they kind of cover off, which I just want to highlight today, as two kind of key areas, for any organization who's looking to improve the way that they secure themselves. Passwords is one of the key areas that we see employees will not engage properly with perhaps the policy in place, if there is one in place, and they will use passwords which are easy to remember. They write them down. They don't use what would be strong passphrases effectively, unless they are enforced. And so, actually educating staff around their own passwords, to their own email systems, to their own systems where that they access, and actually showing them how easy it is to potentially crack a weak password. So even what would be often considered to be a relatively strong password that you're asked to provide if you sign up for a web application or a web service, on an online service where you have characters, letters, numbers, special characters, uppercase, lowercase. Actually, today those kind of passwords can be cracked in less than a minute, and in some cases we're down to seconds. So versus what would be considered an example of a good rule set to create a strong passphrase, okay, where we effectively take 3 random words, we place an uppercase letter in there somewhere and a couple of special characters. Actually, potentially, that password won't be cracked in my lifetime. And that's the difference. We can make these things complex whilst at the same time easy to remember by just thinking about the structure and the way that we create passphrases as opposed to complex passwords. So having a strong passphrase, our advice, is probably the single most effective thing that you can do to, in a home environment, to prevent your family from coming, from experiencing the pain of a cyber attack. And I've had personal experience of friends who've, been defrauded because their email accounts have been attacked, through applications that they've got installed, and passphrase and passwords which have just been too simple and repeated too frequently across multiple systems. So again, have a think about that today. If there's one thing that you can do today, probably have a think about making your password to your email, your personal email account, a passphrase. And if you have the option to turn on 2-factor authentication, which most major email systems do today, then I would also recommend that you do that. That's probably one of the #1 things that you can do. Again, one of the areas that we see more frequently today is that it's very easy to copy and replicate somebody's identity, especially online. And actually, the amount of information that people share through social media, through their interactions online today, the amount of information that is out in the public domain, means that actually, I can steal an identity relatively quickly using probably $50 worth of tools that I can buy online. So more and more so, what we're seeing is what would be in the past very untargeted kind of blanket attacks, phishing attacks, on email. Actually, we're seeing a lot more sophistication being built into these attacks now, where actually research is being done on the company owner. And actually, it's very easy for me to find out that you are a keen tennis player and you are a member of the Cambridge Tennis Club and that you are attending these events. So actually, I can start a conversation. Once I've actually stolen your identity, I can actually start a conversation with your employee who works in accounts maybe, and come across very easily as you, right? Using the language you use, talking about the things that you do. So once I've had 3 or 4 conversations in that way, I'm then going to say, oh, and by the way, urgent, can you just transfer me 30,000 into the new account? That person's had a conversation with me backwards and forwards maybe for the last month and thinks it's the person they're talking to. It's very easy for me to replicate that. So there are things that you can do, and again, we need to instill in our employees the notion that they might not see themselves as a target, but they are perhaps a rung, the first rung onto a larger attack. And so doing those kind of basic things around their security hygiene to protect their identity and the identity of their family at home is important. And you can do, there's a few practical things you can do. Sign up to the free credit scoring agencies. They will ping you if something changes on your credit account, if something happens where somebody's maybe trying to access your information. Sign up to the voters register, make sure that all that information is current, and most importantly, I'll come back to it again, secure email. That your email account is the keys to the kingdom. If I'm able to crack your email account, I'll probably have everything that I need in there to start defrauding you, signing up for a mortgage elsewhere, taking out loans, and then maybe launching an attack on your company as well. And always under this, the key message is, if you think something has happened and you think something is not right, act fast, take action and make other people aware of what's going on, so that hopefully we can stop what's being targeted at you and prevent it from spreading out to your family, friends, and organisation. So the tool that we use in this scenario, which is we're seeing has been an incredibly valuable kind of method to take organisations who don't have investments in security. They don't want to, they don't have the budget to go and spend large amounts of money trying to defend themselves from all these potential attacks. But the single biggest thing that they can do is have their users, change their behaviour and start thinking along more secure lines. We work with an organisation called CyberSafe. It's an online security awareness and training platform, which provides content around all of the major areas that your employees need to kind of be aware of and should be thinking about. It also then targets them with safe attacks effectively. So it will deliver a phishing attack to your employees and record what they do. Obviously, it's just a fake phishing session, but they, so we're not just trying to teach them and make them aware of the challenge that they have. We'll also be testing their responses and seeing if they are actually taking positive, pragmatic action off the back of taking that, of seeing that content. So we will try and see how, how rapid and how those changes are affected, and we can measure all that as well. So if we've got people who are confident and competent, okay, we can see that. If we've got somebody who is less confident and more likely to click a phishing link because they don't necessarily have the awareness or the confidence to question it, then we can also see that as well, which is important because we can maybe then provide some extra help and guidance to that person, so that we can raise that awareness up and plug that gap. The other thing that we can do is we can understand things like sentiment off the back of this. So this is collecting information about the way that your users view and think about security as well. So one of the big challenges you have in any organization is if your employees don't feel that they can put their hand up if they've done something wrong. It's the single biggest challenge that you have in containing the spread of an attack. If somebody does something they know they shouldn't have, or perhaps they've made an error and they feel confident and comfortable that they can ring the boss and say, I've done this, then that is the first step in preventing what could be a catastrophic attack, and you can contain that. If that person doesn't have that confidence and they just say nothing, then the ramifications can obviously be a lot more serious. This will pick up things about do people have that confidence to do that? Do they feel that security gets in the way? Again, important. If people think that this is a barrier to them working, people will find ways around your systems, right? They will look for other tools that they can use to do it in their own way. So, this is about understanding, does security actually work? Is it effective? And, and do people actually engage with it? As I mentioned, there's a whole heap of things that you get through the CyberSafe platform. Understanding if you're a target, talking about passphrases, identity theft I've covered, but also covering, making sure that your staff are browsing securely, whether they're at home or in the office. Those lines have been blurred. So, making sure that they are doing the right things to protect your organization. There's a lot more information on our website, cyberbusinesssecure.com. There's information there that talks to you about, some of the challenges and some of the ways that these kind of tools now can help you make that significant, impactful change to the way that your employees think about security. And for me, I don't normally like to talk about kind of costs of these things, but this really for me is the first time I think that this kind of tool has been viable in a small business setting. So the kind of capabilities that are often delivered often come with a very high price tag in the world of cyber. But for £30 a year, less than £30 a year per user, you get all the tools that you need to help them learn and understand around their obligations and how to protect your company. It allows you to simulate phishing attacks and assess how people are actually getting on with it. So are we actually changing people's behavior? It will notify and alert us when we've got risky behavior going on, and it helps us with this really enforcing those good cultural kind of things where people feel confident and comfortable that they can engage with you in protecting your business. So I think it's a really great value for money exercise as well in the process.
Fantastic.
I think I've come in as I've wanted to kind of talk for about 40 minutes. I think we've kind of just
41. That's pretty good. Yeah, no, I think
questions or if you in,
yeah, good. Yeah, good shout. We had a bit of a chat while you were talking, and I do have a question. It was from about 10 minutes ago from Andrew Page. Are there any affordable cloud-based solutions that are worth taking a look at? Something like the offering from CloudStrike. So I just had a quick Google about what CloudStrike does. I don't know, Andrew, if I need to unmute you so you can have a discussion. If that would help. If I can find you. There you are. Oh, there we go.
Hi, hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, so CloudStrike is a US-based company that offers a suite of cybersecurity products that sit on top of actually all clouds. So it's supported on Azure, it's supported on AWS, it's supported on GCP as well. And they seem to have really good products, but the issue is that's targeted at medium size and above.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you've come across in the industry that is able to handle things like zero trust authentication? So not the base level of security, but is able to then do something a little bit more targeted and a bit more upscale that you would have come across that you think could be taken a look at? And the reason why I'm asking the question is that I run an investment company, and we use obviously trading platforms, and they have a lot of security around them. But I want to ensure that we've got an umbrella over the top of that that is providing another level of security, and we currently don't have that at the moment.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, because what we find is, I mean, there's lots of organisations that, you know, if we talk about zero trust, for example, you know, their technologies are built for the enterprise, and then they try and kind of bring them down into that mid-market space by stripping out functionality or, you know, paring them back. But still, the kind of the cost of those kind of tool sets, you know, can be high. In the context of zero trust and adding an authentication layer. So an interesting one for me is, I think what we're seeing is there are tools now that are being built, leveraged, you know, built with hindsight perhaps, rather than on some of the old kind of legacy technology, which allows us to make a lot more fine-grained decisions around the way that we, you know, access information and how we authorize access to information. So, you know, the notion that I would be coming into my onto my work environment, so I sign in and I'm authenticated as Dom, and I therefore have access to application X, Y, Z, and I can do these things, right? That's a pretty well established kind of route for the way that we would look to, you know, provide a level of security. A baseline level of security, which is roles-based. It's roles-based permissions. Dom is in the technical organization. He's allowed access to this information. He can see these things, and he can do this stuff. And that's pretty well established. I think what we're seeing now is the ability, and I'm thinking of I say they're a small business. They do sell into quite large organizations, but small ones too. And they have a product which allows you to plug into all sorts of other areas where you're going to start to think about how I access information, and it's a very financial services focused tool, which then says, okay, based on not just who Dom is, but, you know, whereabouts he is, what is he doing, what is the sensitivity of the information that he's accessing. So there are tools that allow these kind of very fine-grained view of me, and say, so for example, in a bank, you know, in that financial services example, you might have somebody who's logged in. They are logged in as a senior person on the system, and they can do financial transactions up to a certain amount between certain accounts. But now that person's trying to transfer money out into an account that you don't know. Okay, I can have a system like this which will actually kick in and start to flag that and ask for a step up in permission, for example. So I think this is the next step that we're seeing. What would have been just a few years ago, that would have been the domain of very large organizations and big banks who were able to achieve that level of security. Actually, these tools are starting to kind of become more available into that mid-market and kind of lower down. But yeah, if you're talking about the standard kind of off-the-shelf tools, cloud tools, etc., that are built for enterprise first, then I don't see that there much of an appetite for those folks to be bringing out SMB versions of those tool sets. They're just not markets that they really focus in. They don't they don't pay much attention to. So I'm sorry, Symphonics was the name of the company. I just realised I didn't know who it was. Symphonics, and there are, as I say, there are. I think across the board, we are seeing innovation in these kind of areas, which is open to more to a wider audience. I think some of the stuff that Microsoft is doing around Office 365. 5 years ago, if you'd have said to me, that it's Microsoft doing the security, then I probably would have had a bit of a laugh. But I think actually today, the ecosystem that they've built and the partnerships that they've developed and the technology they've built in around that platform, for most small businesses, if they are configuring it right and they're feeding and watering it right and they're turning the right things on and off, probably provides a lot of those kind of best practice protections that you need, at the price point that you might have anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We've got another question, quick one. Is Zoom safe? I'm interested in this one.
Good question. I think the Zoom, this is my personal opinion, because I have been a user of Zoom for years. I was one of the original users of Zoom, and I have just moved away from Zoom. And I'm quite disappointed that I've had to do that, because I felt that when we've run tests of all of them, and it's always come out top in terms of the performance and ease of use and all of that kind of stuff. I think they have a perception problem, in the sense that they have left some things open in the past, which probably they should have locked down. Those things have been locked down, as far as we can see. I know at least of 3 global banks that are using Zoom as their primary internal, communications tool, both internally and externally. And I often would say that if those banks are using it, then that's good enough. It's good enough for them. It's good enough for me. They're putting hundreds of people on testing this stuff. However, there is that perception, and there is also, I think, the notion that information could be being sidelined out of there. So whilst I would say for the vast majority, unless you are discussing government top secret classified documents, I would say Zoom is probably appropriate in the vast majority of situations that you would find yourself needing it for. However, I work in the security industry, and every time I would open up a Zoom session, I'd be asked, "Is Zoom secure?" So we've moved to Teams, just because it's kind of, the problem's now gone away. But I wouldn't say that Teams is necessarily any more secure than Zoom today.
Interesting. Howard E has asked a question. Do you know of any tools or platforms which allow you to prevent unauthorized data or documents leaving the company's system and alerts you to attempted theft from your organization? He says most systems are security walls, but fail to look at undetected break-ins or assisted insider jobs breaking out. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, and there are a load of data leakage prevention and kind of warning tools, as it were. So there's a whole industry of within cyber, looking at how we handle information leaking out of our organization. And the reality is, as you said, as you rightly point out there, a lot of that is insider threat. So, and oftentimes that's not malicious, i.e. I'm stealing something to sell necessarily, although we do see it more and more, where we've got, Dyson was a good example last year, I think, of plans being stolen for batteries and things like that. Oftentimes what we see is it's somebody leaving and they're taking the company database with them to the new firm. That is rife. We see a lot of that. And that can be difficult. That can be difficult to police. But and I'll probably send out a thing afterwards. There's a whole heap of different tool sets that we can use there, which will help us lock down, analyze, and assess. When data is being leaked out in that way, and actually prevent it from happening. In terms of the insider threat, again, there are tools that we see which are designed to kind of designed as honeypots almost internally to kind of trick people away from the primary data sources and allow us to see where insider activity is happening. I would say at the moment, the only ones that I've seen, that they tend to be very enterprise kind of focused and quite sophisticated in their nature. But yeah, there are actually, I can probably send some links out as well on this.
That'd be great.
There are some open source tools as well. Not everything costs a fortune to go and there are often open source or crowdsourced tools that you can use, which will give you functionality to a point, and give you some baseline capability without having to go and spend money. The challenge is that they are generally unsupported. So if you have a problem, then you're relying on a community to kind of solve your problem. But there are a number of things that you can do probably without spending a lot of money.
Brilliant. I think that is there any more questions? I think that's most of them. We've had what you might not know, actually, Don. We've had a guy, Nigel Sutton, who's from Cam's Constabulary, who joined as well. So he's been putting a few comments on the chat and sort of resources as well that we can send out. Also, Richard asked an interesting question. What do you think about Huawei? Topical.
Yeah, it is a tricky one because I don't understand how we back out of that. If you look at our existing network, our 4G network, it's got Huawei through and through. It's got so much of it in, whether it's badged as Huawei or different components. So my issue is I don't think you can necessarily back out of that without bringing down major parts of the network. It's difficult. I have my own personal opinions on this. I do think that this is a bit of a land grab for 5G, and calling the Chinese out as the bogeyman on this is about trying to sell other companies' products as much as it is about having real genuine legitimate concerns about their ability to infiltrate data out of our network as a result. And it's not, the Huawei components are not going to be in the core government network anyway at GCHQ. So anything that is, any systems that are attached, as far as I know, that would be in that kind of a top secret area wouldn't be going across a Huawei network anyway. So if they want to know what I'm doing, Friday night and what I'm having for my tea, then I don't really care. But as long as all of the major intelligence services have done their own assessments and they all came out that they were happy with where it was going to be put in. So I think that for me probably is enough.
We've got another question just come in. Andrew again. The secure layer in Mobilenet. Sorry, it's to me privately. Yeah, I'll read it out, Andrew. I'm not quite sure what it means. The secure layer in mobile networks is the core network, not the radio network. Does that make sense to you, Dom?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the core systems that are being used in the network in government sensitive, where government sensitive documents are held. As far as I understand, Huawei wouldn't have any involvement in that part of the network.
Okay, so I think we have come to the end of the questions. So I think my takeaway from that is boiling it down to an individual level, obviously, rather than an enterprise level, is look after your email password very, very carefully. And I know we were discussing during this presentation, you were talking about passphrasses. And having had my Netflix account hacked this year, I've instantly put that onto passphrases. I have also had my credit card hacked as well, and I assume the two were probably linked because they got my email address and password. And yes, money went out of it, and I had no idea until the credit card company said, "Is this you spending all this money?" Yeah, they've been brilliant, and obviously you get it all back, but it's a pretty scary reminder that you have no idea that anything's happening at all until somebody alerts you. So yeah, that's why this presentation yeah, basically struck a chord, and I think it's yeah, integral to everybody. So thank you. Oh, NS has just commented. So enable 2FA, second factor authentication, yeah, and multi-factor on your email and social media, yeah. Indeed, and it is now. I think it was from an earlier data breach, to be honest, with Yahoo. So thank you very much. Any resources you want to send round, please send them to me and I'll send them to everybody who signed up. I'm going to say Nigel from the police sent a couple of links to some open information as well, so we'll add those too. So the more the merrier, the more that we can get everybody talking about cybersecurity and just taking one or two tips, the better, I think. Thank you very much for sharing details of your product as well, by the way, and I know Sharon's getting a lot of worth out of that. So thank you, Sharon, for the introduction.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dom, as well. It was brilliant.
It was excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I will end the meeting. Bye, folks.